Governor Bruce Rauner fires a shot at public unions. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Capitol View, the show where we talk about Illinois government and politics. I'm your host, Jamie Dunn, with Illinois Issues Magazine. And with me today is Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at UIS. Professor Redfield, glad you're here.
Good to be here.
And Bruce Rushton, staff writer for Illinois Times. Bruce, glad you're back.
Always a pleasure.
So, Professor, we are seeing a lot of interesting executive orders coming from our newly minted governor, one this week that really ruffled a lot of feathers. Will you tell us a little bit about what happened with this executive order?
Well, it's common for new governors to come in and do executive orders. They've got the stage. It's one thing they can do till we get to the budget and everything else. But Governor Rauner issued a very unusual executive order this week. He essentially directed the Central Management Services to stop transferring fair share dues from people who have opted out of belonging to the Public Employee Union. He told them not to transfer those funds to the union in direct violation of the terms of a signed collective bargaining agreement. So it's not unusual for a new governor to do a hiring freeze or rearrange the furniture in terms of some state agencies, but to essentially order a state agency to violate the terms of a collective bargaining agreement is pretty unprecedented and clearly goes along with what has been a pretty strident anti-union message since he was sworn in and gave his State of the State address.
Well, and for folks who aren't in a union or don't know how these things work, the fair share dues, I feel like kind of needs to be translated a little bit. Bruce, would you mind explaining what this is all about?
Sure, yeah. This affects folks who are not union members but still have money from their paychecks go toward the union for things, the services. And, i.e., the theory is that they wouldn't enjoy some of the job benefits that they have absent a collective bargaining agreement. And so they should have to pay some of the freight toward getting the benefits that they enjoy. That's kind of, I think, a good broad brush understanding of it. It doesn't affect a heck of a lot of workers in the grand scheme of things. I think 6,500, and Kent, you know better than I do how many employees the state has, but it's a lot more than 6,500 people.
Yeah, union, we're talking maybe 46,000 union members, something along that ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, my view of it, at least, is that I was taken by the deafening silence, frankly, by some of the folks in the legislature. I mean, I don't think Madigan's office issued any statement whatsoever. Cullerton's initial response, I thought, was very telling. He said, we're studying this, and the second sentence was, I'll be interested to see what he has to say about the budget. And so clearly, I mean, at least when you don't have Lisa Madigan, I think this is very telling. Lisa Madigan is the Attorney General. She's not representing the state in this matter. He's hired, Dan Webb of Winston Strawn in Chicago. An attorney is handling this on a pro bono basis. My interpretation of this, rightly or wrongly, is folks are saying, you know what, this is Rauner being Rauner. I mean, he can file a lawsuit if he wants. And this isn't going to have any immediate effect. I mean, he's asked for a declaratory judgment, i.e. a federal judge to rule on whether this money can be go to the unions or not. That's not going to happen overnight, and it's ultimately going to go to the Supreme Court. That's what Rauner says that he wants to have happen. We're talking a year or more before, a year that would be very early for it, I think, to reach the U.S. Supreme Court. And so it's not something I think that we have to worry about, anybody really has to worry about right away. The amount of money the unions are losing isn't, given the number of employees is only 6,000 or so. That's not going to be a huge dent in their coffers. And so this is something that's setting the stage, I think, for a battle to come, maybe. I think that right now, folks are probably rightly so. They're more interested in the $9 billion hole in the budget, the $100 billion hole in the pension fund, and this upcoming state Supreme Court case on whether the pension reform plan is actually going to pass state constitutional muster. So I see this as kind of a shiny balloon, so to speak. Look at this over here, I'm being tough on unions, but really, that's not what anybody needs to or should be worried about right now at the instant. That's certainly an important matter, but it's not ripe right now, I don't think.
It does set the stage for, in terms of the contract negotiations. This applies to a contract which is going to expire on the 1st of July. And so the governor has indicated, and this is just a very clear sign that he expects to, give backs from the union a very tough negotiating stance, and to the point that people have talked about lockouts and strikes. We're a long way from that. We really don't know how the session's going to unfold and where we're actually going to be at the end of July. But it reinforces a theme that he's been pushing with the right to work and the attack on contributions by public employee unions to state officials, and now trying to go after fair share. And let's be clear, the fair share is part of the state collective bargaining agreement. It has been upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. The money from fair share goes to contract administration, to grievances. If a union, if someone who's not a member of the union but under the bargaining agreement gets disciplined, wants to file a grievance, the union is obligated to defend them. And none of this money is supposed to be going to political activity. So I agree with Bruce. It's not something that is a game changer in terms of how we're going to balance the budget or what we're going to do with taxes. But if you look at the idea that we need to severely cut workers' comp, that we need to get right to work zones, that we need to get tougher on state employees that are in the collective bargaining units, then this is all part of an anti-union theme. It's clearly perceived as all-out war, frankly, on the part of all of organized labor. This isn't just isolating public employee unions. Workers' comp and right to work goes right after the trade unions. So the governor is really picking a battle here, which surprised a lot of people, because their thought was that we'll work on the budget and taxes, and then maybe we'll get to the governor's where the governor wants to go with collective bargaining. But he's put it out front to begin with.
Well, in the case that he's basing this executive order on, Harris v. Quinn came back with a pretty narrow ruling that could have had this outcome, but the Supreme Court opted not to touch the dues for these employees. They picked just a very specific group of employees that they said no longer had to pay the dues. And unions were really concerned about what would happen with that case. This does allow Governor Rauner to be kind of thrust into the national stage on a major union issue. Do you think that's part of the motivation here as well?
He's raised his visibility dramatically in terms of the national visibility, and within conservative groups. This is a very important part of what's loosely characterized as kind of the economic liberty movement. In Illinois, you'd associate it with the positions of the Illinois Policy Institute, and so this gets national recognition. It also, clearly shows an affinity with conservative groups at the national level that are interested in basically economic issues. This is not social conservative sort of issue. Whether this is good or bad strategy, we'll see once people really start to focus on what the governor has to say about the budget next week.
And it seems to me somewhat different, for example, than what's happened in Wisconsin, where the battleground was a legislature. The dynamics are a lot different than they are there. The battleground here is the courts, at least initially. And so if Rauner loses, he can blame it on judges. And he doesn't have to, I think, get in this kind of a fight with the legislature, with legislators, as has happened in other states.
Well, while we're on the subject of national politics, let's turn to Congressman Aaron Schock. Congressman Schock has been in the news a lot over the last week and a half for a lot of interesting things that are going on that he's been criticized over. I will let Bruce, why don't you sum up what has been going on?
Well, what hasn't been going on with Mr. Schock? He had a week from Hades a little while ago. I mean, just one hit after the next. He was stepping on rakes every time he turned around. He had his.
I believe it all started with The Office.
With The Office that looked like, well, I won't use the term of what I thought it really looked like. I don't watch Downton Abbey. It was a bit over the top, I guess, with the red and was it feather?
Red
peacock?
and feathers and gold accents. I
Yeah.
rather liked it, but I like dramatic
Well,
interior designs.
tastes vary. Then he had his chief spokesman who completely bungled that matter. I mean, it would not have turned into the thing that it did absent this interview with the Washington Post, where they were trying to cover up something that you couldn't miss from 1,000 yards away. Then his spokesman had to resign over some absolutely indefensible racial remarks that he made on social media. Then he had his house, a house that he sold to a big campaign donor. There's indications that it may have been, he may have gotten a higher price than the house was worth. We don't really know about that. That one, I think, frankly, is a little bit shaky. I appealed my own property taxes. I have a little bit of knowledge about how assessed values and whatnot work, and it's complicated stuff. And now he's lately had this thing where there's questions about his travel expenses. He's reimbursed a fair amount of money for personal use of his automobile, and now some folks are questioning, well, how did you use your automobile when you were in Brazil and Japan and Hawaii and Las Vegas and China? I mean, it's not so much, I think, it's the use of the automobile, but to have those destinations kept throwing out, that he was in Las Vegas for the Country Music Festival and missed votes the next day. He was in Brazil. He's in the Far East. He's in Hawaii. It's just this drumbeat of what looks like a person who's out of touch with his district, and that may or may not be the case, but that's the takeaway. And with Mr. Schock, I mean, this isn't necessarily new for him. 3 years ago in 2012, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington singled out Mr. Schock as well as Jesse Jackson Jr. for what they felt was inappropriate use of campaign funds. We all know what happened to Jesse Jackson Jr. Mr. Schock was found to have used campaign funds to pay for exercise videos and travel to the Virgin Islands and 5-star hotels in Greece. And at some point, I think he's in a safe district. He can be a congressman for that district as long as he wants to be. The map is just that way. But if he has ambitions to be anything more than that, he needs to start paying attention, because this kind of stuff doesn't play well to a larger audience. He had gubernatorial aspirations this last time and really had problems because he was ensnarled in an ethics investigation over over campaign contributions in Congress. And so it arguably cost him a chance to run for governor. He couldn't run for governor with that sticking to his shoe. And by the time he finally got, unsnared from that, it was too late. So he needs to sit down, if he, decide what he wants to be. If he wants to be more than what he is right now, I think he probably needs to start paying attention a little more to appearances. He infamously said, well, haters gonna hate. That doesn't play well. That sounds arrogant to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, he was quoting the bard Taylor Swift.
Silly me, I expect better sort of,
Exactly,
quote Janis Joplin at least.
Yeah.
And, this is, he came in as, I think at the time, the youngest member of Congress. He had, he's got a great presence, and so, there's a lot of buzz about him. He's a member of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee. I mean, and so he's had this kind of label of up and comer. And the problem is, while you can be congressman for life from, his district outside of Peoria, you can get too much baggage. And then it becomes a question of, from when you talk to the power structure in Washington, D.C., is this the person that we want to be the face of the Republican Party? Is this the person we want to have on the talk shows on Sunday? And so it could have some adverse effects on his political aspirations. And the allegations, and there's some new ones that have come up, not just in addition to the mileage reimbursement, but also some things about spending which might look like personal use, which is really what the Jesse Jackson issue was about. Then, ultimately, again, you're looking at an ethics violation. But if you take public funds or if you take campaign funds and spend them for personal use, you can not only you might be violating house ethics, you can get in a situation where that's considered income, and if you haven't reported that income and paid taxes, you're now in an area where the U.S. government can come after you for tax fraud, and that was part of the Jesse Jackson. So we're not anywhere near that at this point, but there's some real, if the worst case scenario, this could be, could really jeopardize his career, and I think truly it's probably limited his ability to kind of move up in the short term as far as the role he plays in Washington D.C.
Yeah, he's 33. He's got a lot of time left. He can recover from this, but he needs to stop doing this, and by this I think, paying a little more attention to his image other than his abdomens.
And to be clear, the office, the allegations or the complaint there was that he accepted the services for free. There wasn't necessarily a complaint that he was doing anything illegal. It just violated some ethics rules.
And when you get to reimbursement for mileage, it can be bad record keeping, and it's not uncommon for people to pay money back and say, well, the books weren't right, and therefore I got more money, I was reimbursed more money, and it gets paid back, and you get a slap on the wrist for not keeping good records. And so it may not be anything more than that, but if you start to, if you really are engaging in fraud rather than bad record keeping, you're in legal trouble. The same thing true with questionable expenditures for things that might be construed as personal use out of your campaign fund.
And that's what he did the last time in 2012. He said this is bad record keeping. It was just a mistake. It was that might play once or twice, but if it keeps happening again and again and again, you got to start saying, well,
That's
you got to learn from your mistakes.
The question comes up: is it incompetency or is it corruption? And neither one looks good.
Well, and if you're hopelessly incompetent, that's not good either. So.
All right, I'd like to bring it back down to the state level now, because Bruce, when you're here, I'd love to get an update on what's going on with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, because you cover this more closely than any reporter, I think, that's tracking this issue. So catch us up on what's going on.
Well, I think it's all but a done deal that the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum is going to be established as a standalone entity. You've got Governor Rauner bringing it up in the State of the State address, saying, I'm working with Speaker Madigan. You've got Speaker Madigan immediately thereafter saying, boy, the governor and I are on one page on this thing, and I want a agency with directors appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. And so I think that's all but a done deal. You've got a Republican governor, a Democratic Speaker of the House. I don't see Cullerton falling on his sword or trying to intervene in this thing. So I think that we can all assume that that's what's going to happen. Of several staffers were let go at the ALPLM / IHPA, not the least of which was Ken Crutcher, which was Eileen Makovich. She is the director of the museum. Her chief of staff was let go. She didn't pick that chief of staff, and she's been very vocal in that she didn't have a voice in picking him. So the power struggle that's been playing out there over the past year or so seems to be falling in the direction in the favor of the current director of the museum and not in favor of the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, which leaves the question whether the Historic Preservation Agency, if they lose the Presidential Library and Museum, what do they have left really to administer, and do you need a standalone agency to do that? And I'm not so sure that you do. There's all kinds of rumors that are swirling right now. I've heard that, Rauner is going to propose folding it into Department of Natural Resources, and that was proposed before, I think, under Governor Quinn. It didn't happen. I've heard, we're going to put it into Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, an agency that Rauner on the campaign trail questioned the need for in the first place. It could go into the State Tourism Office. I've heard that scenario too. Nobody knows, or if anybody who does know, somebody knows what's happening. Nobody's been able to pry out exactly what will happen. But the smart money says that a year or so from now, there's not going to be an Illinois Historic Preservation Agency anymore, and it's going to be its duties, the old state capitol, the Dana Thomas House, and Lincoln's Tomb, which are the other three, I think, most important assets of the agency, are going to be under somebody else's oversight. Who that is yet to be seen. I can imagine that the new tourism director, Corey Jobe, the alderman, it's a natural, I think, for his agency. I mean, because he's from Springfield, some of the most important sites are in Springfield. So I think that there's a lot to be argued that might be the way that it falls out. Whether it does or not, we'll see.
There was, this report that came out. Things seem somewhat on hold, at least publicly. We're waiting for this report, and then that came forward. That's, recommended kind of the opposite of what you're saying here. So
yeah, well,
what was going on with
well,
that?
it was 180 degrees opposite. This report from this ad hoc committee recommended not establishing a standalone agency, and in fact, eventually giving responsibility for day-to-day operations to the museum's private fundraising arm, and that's been soundly rejected by the speaker. I was at the IHPA trustee meeting this week, and where they approved the report. You'd think this is this big, massive report, we spent a lot of time, we spent a lot of money, we brought in all these experts, we brought in the head of the Smithsonian Institution. Let's talk about this. And really, they spent maybe 5 minutes on the outside, and no real discussion of it. They just rubber stamped, approved it, and moved on to the next agenda item. That to me signals that they see the writing on the wall. That report it was history before it was written, actually, given the political forces at play. And so I don't see that report going anywhere. It's pretty much, I think, a done deal.
And there's been a lot of issues, a lot of problems going on with the library and museum, over the years, basically, since it was built. The complaints about
since before it was built,
lack of staffing, education programs not going the way that they want, lots of things. These better than anyone.
They have got.
Do you see a path to improvement once this is settled?
Not necessarily, because the path to improvement involves money. And I had asked the speaker at his press conference after the State of the State, will you commit to increasing funding for the institution? He said they'll have to compete for it like everybody else. Well, that's not good news. They have a skeleton staff now at that library, as opposed to the museum. And the library really is the heart and soul of that institution. That's where the artifacts are kept. That's where the real research happens. The museum, I hate to say it, is somewhat Disney. That's the bells and the whistles. But the heart and soul is at the library, and they're hurting now for staff. We haven't had a state historian for years now, and that's been extremely hurtful to the institution. It's not going to fix things unless they come up, frankly, with more money, and they need to figure out a way to get the politics out of it, because the politics in there have been rife. They've been rife for years. It's not going to fix itself overnight. This has been problematic since before it was even built, and the problems have not gone. It's improved only in that finally the facade is off and we're talking about these problems openly, which is what should have happened a long time ago. It's taken us this long to actually admit we have a problem, and that's the first step. But it's gonna require money to fix it.
And the possibility of some kind of meaningful, functional partnership with a university, a consortium of universities. There is, I think that was part of the original vision that got sidetracked through the politics of it, and there would be, any number of institutions, both, UIS, but also the U of I. There are lots of places that I think would have an interest. And that would be a way that you would get staff and resources if you were partnering, so that you would have, and it would also help with seeking grants and getting students involved. And so there's some real potential there if you can get away from the politics and say what's the core mission, and how can we supplement that? And I think a relationship with a university would be a terrific first step.
One thing I think that was very promising was that Speaker Madigan several times after the State of the State said he wanted to see that institution accredited. And I believe Ronner also said that. I might be wrong on that, but I thought he did say that during State of the State. That's hugely hopeful, because if you get accreditation for an institution, that to me holds the promise of insulating it somewhat from politics. An accreditation means that you follow best practices in running an academic institution, and you have to pass muster with the American Association of Museums. And they're not political. Those folks are interested in is making sure that you run a museum and a library in a proper fashion. So if the powers that be want accreditation, I think that that's a really good positive step.
Well, and Governor Rauner is scheduled to give his budget address next week, so we will find out a lot about the future of many things. Professor Redfield, what should we be listening for? What are you going to be looking for? What do you expect?
Well, the state law now requires that the governor present a budget which is balanced without assuming any changes in state law, and which assumes it both in terms of sources of revenue, organization of programs, and that's budget that's balanced in that way. And so he's got to come out with here's how we would balance the budget by cutting a whole bunch of stuff. And then I assume, like Governor Quinn did last year, we'll have the not recommended budget and the recommended budget, because clearly he has a vision for how he wants to both do cuts and change the tax code in order to get to a point. And his priorities will be in there, but the law will force him, and one of the reasons that you've got all of the Democrats kind of holding their fire is they know the governor has to come out and say, here's a balanced budget without changing state law, assuming within the revenue estimates that currently exist. And then here's my new budget with what I'd like to do and how I can change things. And then the Democrats can say, oh, look at the terrible things the governor wanted to do, but here we've got all these cuts restored and everything. They'll take credit for the positive things that the governor is able to do. They'll blame the governor for any negative things.
We have just about 30 seconds left. Bruce, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think one thing that's promising is Governor Rauner's movement on criminal justice. I think that he's finally, thank goodness that he's finally realized, well, he may have realized it all along, we have to reduce the state prison population. He's taking steps toward that. We want to do it like other states have done it, which is a national trend, not like California with a gun to our head held by a federal judge. So that's good.
Well, and we'll have to leave it at that for this week. I'd like to thank my guests, Kent and Bruce, and be sure to tune in next week for your rundown of the budget address. I'm your host, Jamie Dunn, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.